with the AI conversation, you were talking about these fake producers, right? So AI generated beats. There is no real producer. Someone clicks a button and a beat comes out. And because the technology is so good, the beat's actually okay and it's enough to be used. Same with these fake artists that aren't actually real people. The label is going to love them because they don't have to pay anybody royalties. You don't have to pay royalties or an advance to a producer, a fake producer that doesn't actually exist because this beat just came out of thin air. Same with the artist, but who is getting paid then? Peace, what's going on? This is Music Entrepreneur Club podcast episode. Oh, wow. Episode 111. That's 3 ones. I know that's got to be significant in the world of numerology. We already found out that I was like one label deal away from a blood sacrifice in episode 110. So 111 is a better number, a safer number. So neither of us have to become victims of the music industry's satanic practices, right, Dame? That gives you some relief, right?
I have no idea what you or the people that reach out to you are talking about when they refer to the numbers of our podcast.
All right. Don't be a sheep. Anyway, the Music Entrepreneur Club podcast is powered by BeatStars. We're live twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our free music business mentorship program. You don't have to be a member. You don't have to sign up. You don't even have to participate in any sort of blood ritual. It's just free. BeatStars.live. You log on and there we are. You're a part of the conversation. How are you feeling, Dame? I know we have a whole bunch of stuff that we could talk about because it just kind of seems like everything we post becomes a controversy.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of topics. Hopefully we can get to most of them. The verses was a big topic this week between Dipset and the Locks. Diddy starting a new label. Virtual artists are getting signed. Fake robotic artists are getting signed. Reactions to our IG post. Where do we want to start, Payne?
Let me start with one reaction to the IG post. It's not actually anything, I don't think, negative or controversial. I just thought it was an interesting point. And it had to do with last week's conversation about T-Pain's rant about unoriginal artists. And
So which IG post, which IG post are you referring to that we posted this week?
the one in which we talk about why there is unoriginality in today's music and maybe who's
In a lot of today's music.
In a lot of today's music.
Right.
We're not jumping on the bandwagon of over extending T-Pain's rant to apply to all music. Absolutely not. And we're not even necessarily saying it's a bad thing at all. And of course, the fact that we even bring it up means people get upset and want to, take shots at us. And that's just the nature of the internet. So I'm ignoring those comments. But the one that I thought actually brought up a good point, and I just want to hear your reaction, was by AO Soundmind. And he says, I've never understood the concept of being different. No one is telling all the reggae producers and artists that all their songs sound the same. No one's telling country artists to stop putting guitars in their instrumentals. Why is only hip hop that you have to? Okay, that was grammatically awkward. But basically, why are we applying this concept of originality so stringently to our genre of music, but you don't really see that level of a strict standard being applied to other genres? And then he says at the end, there's room for the, quote, weird guys, unquote, as Payne said, and room for cookie cutter guys who just want to make popular music. No one's forcing anyone to listen to specific music.
I mean, I he may have a little bit of a point. I mean, because when you do listen, I don't know the history of reggae music, but when I hear reggae, it does sound similar. I mean, you know that it's reggae. I think the only thing that I would say is that given the history of hip hop and in like the 80s and 90s, it was important to be different. It was important to stand out. So I think I don't know the history of reggae, but throughout the history of hip hop, that was something that's always been important. Especially when it comes to being an MC and to, sharing your story. Because in the 80s and 90s, like every artist was different. There wasn't really, I mean, there might have been acts that sounded similar, but labels were trying to find different artists that were, pushing the boundaries and doing something different. Cause that was, that's what it was about, like being different, being the best. So that's the only thing I can say in response to that. I've never heard that response, and I think it makes a lot of sense. But I don't know the history of reggae. I don't know the history of rock because rock, not being a rock fan, but like that sounds the same to me. So I kind of get where he's coming from. But I just, given the history of hip hop, from what I know, being different is important. Having different perspectives, I think, is important. That's all I can say about
I
that.
think it's an
But
interesting conversation, though, right? Especially when you take into consideration that rap music as a genre really hasn't been around that long, and the fact that in the very early '80s, everybody sounded different. I don't think really explains the conversation we're having today because back then how many signed hip hop artists were there? There were very few. And then how mainstream was rap music? Not at all. I mean, like it took Blondie, rapping on one of their records to well, Debbie from Blondie rapping on one of her records to kind of catapult that out to the mainstream audience to the point where like, what is this? Otherwise, it was a really marginalized genre, and it's still marginalized to a certain point. I mean, we can get into that conversation and on a separate podcast when all the racism deniers can come out of the woodwork and attack us in the comment section, but not today. Not today, Devil. And I just
but
think and it was also isolated to a region. So I think things have definitely changed, and so it's hard for me to apply what was happening in the early '80s to what's happening now when everybody's rapping, everybody's making beats.
But the other thing I would say is like I would find it hard to believe that people that are heavy fans of those genres don't have that conversation. I mean, the reggae that I hear is probably the mainstream reggae, but I would imagine if you're part of that culture, you want different types of artists in different sounding music. So I would find it hard to believe they don't have that conversation if there's not as much diversity within the genre. Same with rock. It all sounds the same to me, but I'm probably hearing them if and when I hear rock, it's probably the mainstream rock cats. But if I dive deep into that genre, I bet you there's diversity in perspectives and sound of the music. I guess that would be the other thing. I just don't know those genres like that. I'm not a super fan of those genres, but and if you're not a super fan of those genres, what you hear is probably what is considered mainstream in that genre.
Well, then let me ask you this. I don't really listen to reggae. I listen to dancehall, and I can name three plus dancehall artists I listen to that sound completely different from one another. Um, but in terms, I know we're not talking about dancehall, we're talking about rap. But if I look on the rap charts right now, Lil Nas X is number one. That's Industry Baby featuring Jack Harlow. Obviously, Lil Nas X and Jack Harlow sound completely different. They have very different styles. Um, Number two is Polo G, who I would say is somewhat similar to Lil Nas X, but not really, in the sense that they're both kind of melodic. Number three is Masked Wolf, also different. Number four, Lil Baby and Lil Durk. I'd say they have similar sounds, but I don't think they're copycats of one another. Number five is Meg The Stallion. She's different from all of them. So I feel like there is diversity And also, to go back to T Pain's conversation, he wasn't, I don't think, talking about who's charting, who's a popular artist. He's talking about the people that are coming up and emulating the popular artist. And he's saying, don't emulate the popular artist. Why would you want to name yourself something that's similar to Lil Baby when you sound like Lil Baby? That's not going to serve you well, which I agree with. But it's not a criticism. It's, to me, it's helpful advice. So I think this conversation just really takes root in our minds and branches out in so many different directions that it's hard to stay focused on kind of the core message. So I don't know. Maybe we should move on because I think this is a rabbit hole.
I agree. So there's a number of topics. So I saw an article, I think Z from DJ Booth retweeted it about the signing of a robotic or virtual artist. Um, and there seems to be a lot of traction. Obviously, from a label standpoint, if you have a fake artist that's only exists in the virtual world, you don't have to worry about them complaining. You don't have to worry about them, I guess, not touring because you can have them tour in Roblox or whatever virtual world you want them to perform in.
Well, if your
In,
virtual
in
artist starts complaining, then you know that your label is really immoral.
yeah, so I don't know how to fit if this starts gaining traction. And there are, obviously, I don't fear that like real artists are going away, but with every new thing eats into the pie, right? If something is taking attention away from what could be an artist that's busting their ass day in and day out, like we have to pay attention to that, even if it's a little bit, because it might grow in popularity. There might be more. And again, from a business standpoint, a label could love this, right? Especially if it streams well and people buy virtual tickets and buy merchandise. So I think that I don't like it, especially because I just went to the page. I believe that the artist name's Michaela. And then the first hashtag you see is Black Lives Matter. I think that they're kind of taking advantage of that and trying to get more people just to like the page and gain sympathy. I don't know about sympathy, but more people to just they're really trying to humanize this fake person.
Wait, that it was just totally out of context. It was just
What?
the Black Lives Matter hashtag.
Yeah, it's just I don't see anything on the page that everything else on the like all the posts are just random pictures and things like that. I just think the Black Lives Matter, they're just taking advantage of the slogan and trying to get people to buy into this page and make it think like I don't know who's controlling the page. They probably couldn't give a shit about Black Lives Matter. They're just using it, to me, it's just like a marketing thing to get you to, you know, because they're trying to humanize this virtual artist. And I don't know. I don't like
That's
it.
a hilarious sentence. They're,
What?
they're trying to humanize a virtual artist who's
I
not.
mean, you give it. I mean, it's like a cart. I mean, there's people that love cartoons, right? So it's the same. So cartoons have stories. Cartoons have feelings, and but not really. I mean, but
Yeah, but cartoons have voice actors too, so you know that this particular cartoon is voiced by this particular actor, especially when we're talking about, the major Disney productions or the Pixar production. I guess they're the same thing, but you know what I'm saying.
but I'm sure somebody's voicing this virtual artist music. Like, uh, I don't know. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I just want to give people a heads up of kind of what's happening in the music industry in case it becomes like a bigger thing. But this virtual artist has 3 million followers, so I think it's something to pay attention to. If fake artists can get 3 million followers,
Okay, but sorry, I know you want to keep this brief, but we've had conversations really that you've kind of spearheaded about AI technology.
mhm.
I think this is part and parcel with that conversation. So with the AI conversation, you were talking about these fake producers, right? So AI generated beats. There is no real producer. There's just someone clicks a button and a beat comes out. And because the technology is so good, the beat's actually okay and it's enough to be used. And same with these fake artists that aren't actually real people. The label is going to love them because they don't have to pay anybody royalties. You don't have to pay royalties to or an advance to a producer, a fake producer that doesn't actually exist because this beat just came out of thin air. Same with the artist, but who is getting paid then? Who's behind it's
I don't know if
because
it's
even
the
with AI technology, like there's got to be a producer or a composer or somebody or a group of them together
So are
creating
you
these
talking? Are
algorithms.
you talking about the producer situation, the AI, or are you talking about Michaela,
I'm
the
talking about
virtual
both.
artist?
There have to be real
Well,
creatives behind these
yeah. Well, I'm
endeavors.
sure there's a creator of Michaela. Now, I don't know what that deal looks like. I don't know if the label like buys rights and just buys her out, or if it really is like an artist that created this and they have a deal with whoever created it, and it's maybe a more traditional deal. I highly doubt that it's like a straight traditional deal, but whoever is the creator of this person probably has the rights to her. And then same with, so when you go on these AI sites to make beats, it says like who owns the beat. And I think there's sites, the site, because we had somebody on, I can't remember the name of the company, but we had the founder of the company on an MEC session. And I believe he said that they were still trying to work out what the deal was going to look like at the time. Like, I think if you distributed the music through them, you got complete ownership in the music, but there was a percentage that went back to their company. So I think it's going to be different on each site, but AI generated music production is definitely a thing. And he was saying it's going to get better and better. So that's why I was telling producers, it might not, you might listen to the beats now and it might be terrible, but fast forward 5, 7 years, the beats might actually be really dope, or might just need some minor tweaks for the artist that an artist may be able to learn how to do themselves. So I think it's just super important to, develop your sound, work on your branding, work on relationships so that it's not a threat to you, and artists don't just start using these sites to get beats.
But there are also AI generated songs complete with music, lyrics, voices. And right now they sound pretty creepy, but eventually they too may sound passable. And so that's something that concerns everybody, not just beat makers. It concerns songwriters of who write lyrics, instrumentalists, so on and so forth. I think that's a bigger conversation. But how how these deals are structured for artists that don't actually exist, that's what really um, interests me because, well, obviously there's production involved. Obviously, at this point, there's songwriting involved. Um, but who's getting the fees from performances, and who's behind all this? If the labels themselves are creating virtual artists, that sounds sinister to me. That sounds like some weird Stepford wife type shit where they're just creating these these cash cows that don't exist, just kind of as a big middle finger to the living, breathing human artists out there. Uh, I don't think that's what's happening, but if it is, oh man,
Yeah, I'm skimming through the article again. I don't think it mentions anything about like the specific deal.
is it a
Um,
Rolling Stone article? Because if so,
no,
that's
it's
why.
music business worldwide.
Oh,
Um, so yeah, I mean, again, I just think for artists that are listening to this podcast, what I always tell them, obviously continue to develop your music, but continue to share your story, continue to work on your brand and build community. If you understand the value of community and building your community, you can have a long career in the music industry, and none of this will affect you at all. There's enough people to kind of carve out your lane, if people rock with you, and it will protect you against any of this weirdness going on, because your community will be locked in with what you have going on, and will constantly stream your music. So I mean, ultimately that's the protection against any of this weirdness going on in the music industry. So no matter what labels do in the future, you could always carve out your independent business.
Strange times we live in.
Yeah. No, I think it's weird, but you gotta. I like to just keep my pulse on what's happening, and if it might be normal for young people coming up these days to, subscribe to a virtual artist, or to be a super fan of a virtual artist. Um, I mean, now that I'm thinking about it more, like, is it that much different or any different from being like a super fan of a cartoon of Bart Simpson, or um the Thundercats, G.I. Joe? Like, is it different from being a fan of
I
a
like how you're
cartoon?
mentioning all the early '90s stuff when there's been this whole cosplay anime world.
I don't know anything about that. I know
I
about what
don't
I
either, but
I
I
know what
know
I
that
grew up on.
we're
He-Man
sounding
and
old right now.
Transformers. Like, I was a fan of cartoons. Is it that much of a stretch to be a fan of a virtual artist? Like, now that I think about it like that, like, I really don't think so. I mean, it maybe a lane that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, back in my day, we had NPCs and we watched Mighty Mouse. We're actually moving through these topics. I'm proud of us. We're not jumping down any rabbit holes.
Do we care about Diddy's new R&B label, where he says that the deals are going to be more transparent and fair? Obviously, Diddy has come under criticism for how he worked with artists in the past. Do we care that Diddy's starting a new R&B label, and do we believe that he's now going to be transparent and it's going to be like 50-50 deals? Do we care? Should we care? I mean, obviously Diddy's a legend, um, still doing big things in the music industry.
I care because I want another Mary J. Blige album or something like that. But yeah, I mean, if it is transparent, then I guess we have to wait until I don't know. Do you think we're ever going to get to the point where the labels start doing what the artists are doing and giving out real transparency about their deals? Because nowadays it takes a Kanye to post a bunch of scan documents from his label agreement for people to even start delving into the real core of what a label agreement, what an artist agreement is. uh the labels never do that. It's always a disgruntled artist. So it'll be interesting to see somebody, if that's what's going to happen. I mean, if Diddy's talking about transparency this, transparency that, I would personally like to see some of these deal points.
Well, so in defense of Diddy, I think what we're doing, when we criticize some people's past actions from the 90s and the 2000s, like, we're using today's lens of the music industry and looking at old deals that way. But if we take ourselves back to those times, we didn't have social media. Independent art, like, being independent wasn't like the cool thing to be. It was something that was very difficult to be. I mean, now you can be a successful independent artist, and we have access to all these tools and resources. So yes, the labels had more leverage. So they were able to put artists in those deals because artists really didn't have much of a choice. But that's just the business back then. So now that we do have, all of these distribution options and marketing options, social media and things like that, the power has just shifted to the artists. So labels are forced to have, better situations, better deals for artists. So we can't really look at the 90s and 80s and early 2000s, through the lens of today's music environment. That to me, that's not fair to Diddy. Like that's what it was. That's like, saying, oh, Moses Malone and Julius Irving and all these players from the 80s, they only made like, I don't know how much they made, $50,000, $70,000. And now guys are signing, 40 million. Like the environment has changed, leverage has changed. For the NBA, the economy is much bigger. The market is much bigger. So it's different, but we just can't look at to the music environment of 30 years ago through the lens of today, and that's just not fair. But so
That's
I
a
think
great point, though.
but what I think Diddy is doing is just keeping up with the time. Like you have to give deals this way in order to compete in the music industry today. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I think it'd just be interesting to hear about what that means from him rather than from a disgruntled artist. Not saying that he's going to create disgruntled artists. I mean, Diddy, to this day, I don't know what was in the deal, so I'm not taking anybody's side on this. I would find it interesting for him to be proactive and stay ahead of the game, and someone of his caliber being transparent and conveying to the public what a updated deal, fairer deal in 2021 looks like, I think would be of a lot of value to artists and to setting some kind of precedent in the music business.
From what I've seen, people that were successful, in the 90s and 2000s, or just like the old music industry,
Mm-hmm.
like when they get involved in today's industry, they don't go all the way to where we're really at. For example, like Steve Stout and United Masters, right? Like he thinks he has some groundbreaking, revolutionary thing in United Masters, but there still is it's still a percentage. Well, they changed it, so they changed their model to be more like a DistroKid or a BeatStars distribution. But when it first came out, I think they were still taking like 10 or 15%. And I think there was like a non-compete clause, like in not a non-compete clause. What am I looking for? What did they have? My mind's drawing a blank. Anyway, they had what's the clause where you have the right to like if I distribute a song through United Masters and a label is interested in working with me now, like United Masters has an like a first right of refusal. My
Yeah,
bad.
yeah.
First right of refusal.
It's on the tip.
So there's a first right of refusal clause in the United Masters, and they're taking a percentage when DistroKid has been out for years, and they're just charging you an annual rate or a monthly rate to upload as much music as you want. But United Masters thinks they're like so far ahead of the game. So from what I've seen is cats that have been in the music industry for a long time, they think that they're matching like what's actually happening, but there's already services that have gone beyond that, because I think they're just so used to the old way where it was so much in their favor and they had so many advantages and leverage in negotiation that they think they're meeting today's standards, but there's already a bunch of services that have went beyond that, so they're not leading anything. um I would guess, because it's hard to understand. I mean, I think if you have a label with more traditional deals, and you're taking the artist publishing, and you're getting a lion's share of the profits, to now say, wait, the artist now, it's kind of flipped, the artist now, like, so that at least that's what I've seen. So I would be interested to see what Diddy's deals look like. But I think it's dope. I just think it's dope for R&B too. I'm an R&B fan, so more people pushing R&B, I think is a positive thing.
I want to have this conversation next episode and dive deeper into it, just because I think it plays really well into my controversial, and I don't want to use the V word. I wouldn't say it went viral, but shout out to Producer Grind. They reposted one of my tweets about the producer versus beatmaker conversation, and and it was controversial enough to have the heavyweights weigh in. Everyone from Southside 808 Mafia to T minus, shout out to both of them, to God, Drummer Boy chimed in. He wasn't really happy with me. So I think I think that's part of this conversation when we talk about how things have changed so much, especially in the last 20 years in the music business. With those changes in technology, with the changes in how music is made, should come some changes from the top, right? And when we had Mark Tavern on, he was talking about how it doesn't make sense. And I think this is a really, 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 really important conversation. He was talking about how it doesn't make sense for the labels to buy out the masters anymore. Because back 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it made sense because you were recording in a label studio. The label was handling the A&R. The label was, covering the mixing, the mastering. The label was having to recoup all of these really expensive services and this and that and staff, because it took that much more effort to create a master recording back then. Nowadays, a 13-year-old can do that on a laptop. So why, if this 13-year-old kid is doing that and the label's signing the artist after the master is already completely finished and already delivered, why does the label still own the master? Why isn't there a more equitable split? And I see that conversation as a big can of worms for music in general and for music business in general, because there are so many different scenarios in the music business and so many different aspects of the music business to which that conversation can apply and be adapted to. It is just making my head spin right now. So I do want to kind of dive deeper into that, just because we really are, as you said, a lot. The music business is really locked into how it was decades ago.
Right.
Not much
I
has changed, even though the technology has changed, even though the platforms have changed. Everything's changed, but the business, damn near.
Yeah, I mean, I think paying, like, if you're paying for it, like, that's a big piece of it. But what I look at these days is like who's also like moving the record, right? Either with money or with relationships or with a platform. Like, to me, like that's crucial, right? Because if you're moving the record for it to get more streams, get more sales, obviously the pie is bigger. Like, I feel like you deserve more for that. So, however you're moving the record, like I said, whether it's relationships with your own platform, your own fan base, or with money, or just with marketing know-how, you just know how to run ads effectively. You know a lot of influencers. I feel like I think paying for the record is important, obviously, especially if the artist can't do it themselves. Like, I think that's crucial. But we look into who can move the records, like what's moving the record. Not that it's a science and you can say, okay, well, 17% is attributed to this. I know you can't do that, but sometimes you just know like who's moving a record. So I think that's super important in the conversation.
And I think to an extent you can. It's just that whoever is analyzing those numbers is probably working for the label, so they don't necessarily want to dive that deeply in if that means cutting the creatives into a higher percentage of ownership. You know what I mean? That just wouldn't serve them well. So I think we're seeing certain benefits, but I don't think they're all that substantial. So, for example, and without diving into this because we're almost running out of time, but say an artist nowadays, a rapper nowadays, builds up an organic fan base, and they're already making six figures off of all of their income streams without a label. Then the label comes in and says, "Okay, we're going to offer you $1 million." Well, the artist can turn that down because they're in more of a position of power because they already have their fans. But the label is effectively buying a ready-made product. They're not really doing much development. They're certainly not creating any kind of master for that for that artist. The artist is already doing all of that. They just want to invest in what's already there. And I don't want to minimize the influence of a label. I don't want to minimize that at all. All I want to do is call into question the agreement that they have, because if you're an artist with more leverage, generally what that means is you get a higher advance. It doesn't mean that you somehow negotiate for a higher split of your master royalties, and it doesn't mean that you necessarily enter into a partnership with the label such that, you know, decades from now you actually have some kind of equity in the master. And that's why a lot of artists end up broke or disgruntled or what have you. So should that change? Should that be a conversation? I think, yeah, it probably should be a conversation that leads to change. And if even a guy like Mark Tavern, who's from the industry, and he'll say that about himself, and he was on a very different side of the coin way back. If even he's saying that something fundamental needs to change about how these deals are negotiated, then I think that legitimizes the need for this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Artists have a lot of leverage these days. So we have the ability to build up a lot of leverage, not just artists just don't have a lot of leverage just by themselves. You have to build the leverage so you can have it in these negotiations. The last thing that I wanted to just briefly talk about is I made a post, and I don't know this cat. There are some people that I do know that reposted this tweet, and that's how I found it. But it said many artists and musicians should not be in the music business. You clearly don't have an understanding or emotional capacity for it, and that's okay. Do it as a hobby and share it for free. It's fine. I personally love to cook, but I'm not trying to open a restaurant. I just agree. I just agreed with it because obviously we deal with a lot of artists. I've been around tons of artists at this point, and I know how tough the music industry is. We talked about all the challenges and how grounded you have to be from a mental standpoint, and just, you know, to constantly get criticism, constantly get praise. Like, it's tough to be an artist in the music industry. So it was just something I agreed with. But this post got a lot of support. I think most people agreed with it as well. But I think it was another case of people like reading what they wanted to read in the post, right? Because they were like, why are you guys encouraging people to quit? Like that, if this post is encouraging you to quit, in my opinion, you are already thinking about quitting and you want to quit. And maybe this does apply to you. Maybe you don't have the emotional capacity for it, because I don't think this post encourages people to quit. I don't think we encourage people to quit. If we were encouraging people to quit, we wouldn't have this damn podcast. We wouldn't be going live twice a week, giving you free information. We are trying to get as many successful music entrepreneurs as we can. Like that's why this platform exists, to give you real information, to figure out how to build a business in today's music industry, because there's a lot of different ways to pursue music. If you think that we're trying to encourage people to quit, that's you reading into what we're doing with your own preconceived notions and assumptions, because that's not what we're doing. Like I would hope that if you do decide to quit, I want to give people the information, as much information as they can, so they can make the decision for themselves earlier rather than later. And I've always said that. Like, if you're going to quit, I want to give you the information so that you can make that decision for yourself, so that you can quit at 24, 25, as opposed to not having the information that we give you. And then you find out the information, but now you're 35 and now you want to quit. I think it's a much better situation to have all the information at 24, 25 and decide to pivot. And to me, it's not really quit. I know that there's like this stigma on being a quitter, and to me, quitting is not a bad thing. To me, like sometimes quitting is just unblocking what you were really meant to be, like your true
Yeah.
calling. To
Yeah, like
me,
when
it's
you
not.
leave an abusive relationship, you're quitting that relationship, but it's good for you. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah, like some people should quit. Like there are things that I have quit that I'm proud of quitting. Like being a quitter, it just depends of the circumstance, depends what you're quitting and how you're quitting, like and what you do after that. Right? If you quit music and go on to be a successful dentist, like that would and you love it and that's a passion, that's a positive thing. I think you released yourself from all of the time that you were committing to trying to be an artist so that you could be a successful dentist. That's a positive thing in my opinion. And if you don't think that's positive, I mean, we just don't see eye to eye. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, it's one of those scenarios in which I just kind of have to laugh because if I do anything else, it'll just be a negative emotion. It'll just be frustration because you know we've had this free music mentorship program for I don't know how long. We've been touring for I don't know how long. We've been giving away free resources online for I don't know how long. And the second you share something that says, maybe you should consider whether or not you have the emotional capacity for uh, music industry work, you got people jumping down your throats talking about, and you didn't even, those aren't even your words. You were just sharing something. You got people
Right.
jumping down your throat
But
talking about, why are you discouraging people? You don't ever give back. You don't do anything. It's like, yo, I work harder on giving you information than you work harder on giving yourself information. So I just have to laugh.
yeah, I mean, there are just some professions that require a different type of person. Like, being an MMA fighter at this point requires a not and not just from a physical standpoint. Like when you step into an MMA ring, like that person is trying to kill you. Like they're on a whole nother level of what they're trying to do to you. There are some people that can't, probably myself included, they can't get their mind in that in that state to be able to compete with somebody that's really trying to like knock your head off, right? Like there are some people that like Israel. I just the style bender, whatever. I always mispronounce his name. He said in an interview, and it looked pretty convincing, that he's prepared to die in the ring. There are not that many people that can go into a fight like with that mindset. And if you don't have that mindset and the other person does, you're at a clear disadvantage, right? To
Yeah,
be a
that's why I
brain
don't fight.
to be a brain surgeon. I mean, there's just so many occupations that require a certain type of person. And I think being an artist is that, because it's a unique environment that you need to put yourself in. And if you don't have the ability to put yourself in that space, or if criticism throws you off your game, or if you're just there's a lot of things. Like it's not a bad thing if it's not for you. There's a lot of shit that's not for me, and I'm not, I I'm not ashamed to say it. Like there's just shit that's not for me. Like it's okay. I think when it comes to artists, they so sensitive and they react, and they already have all these thoughts in their mind. So when they see something, again, they read into what they think it says with what they want it to say, and they respond to their own assumptions.
Oh yeah. Well, hopefully next time we can dive deeper into that because my whole producer versus beat maker conversation certainly yielded a lot of those kinds of responses. But hey, since Dame is being accused of not giving back and not encouraging people to succeed, now starting today, we have a free music business mentorship program that we invented a time machine to backdate for over a year ago. Somehow we're just really good at that. It's called the Music Entrepreneur Club. And if you're currently living in the present rather than the past, and you don't want to go through all of our hundreds of free resources that we just created today via our time machine. You can check us out on beatstars.live Monday and Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. No need to pay, no need to sign up. You just show up, and there you are. You're a part of the conversation. Also, since we're so much living in the future these days, there's a way to get automatically alerted every time we go live for our free music business mentorship program. Dane, let them know. We just started this today, so I don't know. I don't have the number memorized, but what's that number?
If you text MEC to 844-206-7800, you'll get a text right before we go live. You know, the sad thing about that person's comment on our page is that they're on our page, like they follow us. It wasn't somebody that doesn't follow. I don't know how long they've been following us, but it's like, how can you accuse us of not supporting artists and you follow do you not see the page? Why did you follow us in the first place? Like, do you not see all the content on our page that goes back years at this point?
She just liked your beard.
What'd you say?
She just liked your beard. It had nothing to do with the music.
I don't know. I invited her to, I forget what her response was. I think she said, I'll think about it, or I'm open to it, or something like that. Like, you know,
that's good. It's good to be open-minded.
Thank you. We appreciate it. But shout out to everybody that supports what we do. If you get a lot out of what we're doing and want to share some positive feedback, it's always appreciated. I recently had a cat named Piff Marty on, and he was telling me that he's been following us for a minute because he's recently got a decent amount of momentum, you know, with his visuals. And he said that you know, that he's gotten a lot from our sessions and from our page. Not that we're the reason that he's got momentum, but it's been helpful in his journey. So feedback like that is always good to hear, because that's the fuel that keeps me going, and it keeps me, you know, as consistent as we are, you know, with the podcast and with our social media posts. So it's always good to hear stories like that.
Cool. Until the next moment of controversy. Peace.